All right. Morning, everyone. Any questions? Yes.
Clarify the CSV assignment.
Give me a specific question.
What are we supposed to do in general? Like, what are we supposed to find? We're not supposed to find a double quote, right?
All right. So you have this string. What's the string called? Data.
Yeah, it's data.
Okay. So you have the string data, and so it has some string, a comma, a string, comma, and so on. And so what you need to do is you need to count the commas. And you've already done that in the previous assignment. And now the difficulty that was tossed in was to say, well, what if the items themselves contain commas? No, which they must. And so the way that the CSV format, which is a real format, it's not something that I invented to torture you, it is something that people really do use when they exchange spreadsheet information. So if there's a comma inside here, then there's going to be a double quote around this. And so that way, what you will do, and you can see the solution for homework 19 that does this, it goes through the string, and now when it sees the first double quote, then it sets a Boolean flag that's called inside quotes. And so then when it's inside quotes, even if it sees a comma, it's not going to count it. So when this flag is on, or true, then you don't count any commas. So the logic, and you'll see that the code in the solution, the logic says if you see double quote, then turn inside quotes on, except if it was already on, turn it off. That's rule number one. And rule number two was when you see a comma, then only count it if inside quotes is on. With those two rules, you now count the number of commas accurately. And then you add one, and that gives you the number of items. Now, the remaining complexity in this part is, we already talked about what happens if the data items have commas. Well, what if they have quotes? Could happen. So I gave you, a contrived example of a data item that has quotes, but it could happen. And so the rule for quotes is that a quote is double. So when you see two quotes in a row, then that means that's an actual quotation mark. And so that's not something that is the delimiter of something else. So what you should do is, when you see two quotes in a row, then you should just skip past them because they don't have anything to do with modifying the comma count. And that's a pretty easy modification. How do you test whether you find two quotes in a row?
That's the next one.
So there's two ways of doing it. One is you could remember the previous character and check was the previous character a quote and is the current character a quote. But actually there's a much easier way of doing it because you can simply check.
Whatever.
So if you have an index I that tells you the position that you're currently looking at, you can extract the substring of length 2 and check whether that string of length 2 is 2 quotes. So there's a mildly mean thing. Now, how do you express the string that consists of 2 quotes?
Quote, backslash, quote, backslash, quote, quote.
Yes, it's quote, backslash, quote, backslash, quote, quote. Because you have to put the quotes inside backslashes when they happen inside Java strings. So if this condition is true, then you know that you have found 2 quotes in a row. And I'll leave it up to you what you do in that case. There's a minor catch for this condition. Normally, when you extract the substring from I to I plus 1, it's sufficient for I to be at a valid position. But if you're at the very last position of a string, and then you check from I to I plus 2, then what will happen?
Out of bounds.
Then you'll get an out of bounds exception, yes. So you need to worry about that before making that. So, and that's really all that you need to do. Yes, ma'am?
For the draft, I just copied your solution for last.
Okay, that was very clever. You will get full points for the draft.
No, but it works. But it works. It works.
Oh, it might, but I might now put in more test cases with the double quotes.
And commas in the double quotes?
And commas.
It still works.
I will attempt to find a test case that fails with the previous assignment.
Okay.
I guess you'd have to. How would you fail that test case then?
All right. So this is such a good question that I'll take a minute for. So, and it's a good question because designing good test cases is important. It's usually easier to spend a few minutes to design a good test case than it is to just stare at the program and try to argue why it's right. So let's take this question seriously. I'll need to erase this stuff here. So I want to design a test case that where I have these quotes where it would have gone wrong. Oh yeah, that's actually a good question.
Can't really think of anything where
all
it
right.
would work.
Let's just say I have a single, one of my items contains a quote. And maybe you're right. No. All right, let's see why so if we have an item that contains a quote, and then one that says hello.
I guess if it starts with double quotes, it might break it.
So in this case here, it doesn't really matter because it would work. So let's say I have this side inside quotation marks there.
That would break it, I think, right?
No, it wouldn't. Masculine. But let's say I have both the quotes and the commas combined. So I have my item is Fred, comma, and the marvelous whatever. Give me an attribute. Youthful. Well, right. Now I put this in quotes. Then these quotes get doubled. And now you say I'm still safe, right? Because this is on. So it'll ignore this one. This one will turn it off and on, off and on. You may be right.
No, well, what if, I found one already. What if I
Okay.
had two quotes? You added two quotes, like you quoted two words? Maybe you quoted
Okay,
two
so that's
words?
quote useful. And we're not being very nice to poor woman here, but whatever. It'll still work because it's on,
Because I always have two.
off,
Yeah.
on, off, on, off, on,
Oh, how come mine didn't?
off, on.
What if you started the item with a quote? Like,
Okay, let's say we had a quote here.
right,
As soon as there's a comma inside the thing, we have to have a quote in here. I think you may be right. I think you may be right, and you may have a trivial answer to this, because I have not thought of that. Yeah.
What if your string was like, I don't know, like some sort of textbook like glossary term for a quotation mark? Like what if this is a quotation mark and then you have two quotation marks with
Okay, sure, but then I have a quotation mark. Okay, now let's approach it a little bit more systematically. In the item, there's two possibilities. Either the item starts with a single quote, or it doesn't. So now let's look at the case that the item starts in a single quote. Why would it have done that? Because somewhere inside here is a comma that we want to ignore, right? And if there's no double quotes in there, we will ignore the comma because this thing turns the flag to true. And when the flag is true, we ignore the commas. But now let's say there's some number of double quotes in there. And it doesn't matter, because they're next to each other. They turn the flag off, they turn the flag right on, and there's never going to be a comma in between. So it seems to me that she's right, that
You accidentally
the
gave
logic
us-
just by sheer accident always works.
It's such a well-written.
All right, I'll ponder that and see if I can't come up. See, the other possibility, just to beat it to death, is what if we had something that had no commas, but merely a bunch of double quotes? Then it wouldn't have been enclosed in that outermost quotation mark, because the way my logic was that only if it senses a comma does it put quotation marks around the whole thing. And in that case, everything is still fine because there are no commas in there, and so it's not going to be tripped up. And after an even number of them, it starts sensing commas again. So, so this may have been a stupid assignment. All right, excellent. Yes. Well, can't argue with success, right? Okay.
I'm a favor when something works and you don't know why.
and I tried the test there. I was like, oh, that still works. That still works too.
I will put a message out if it turns out that there was actually, but I don't see it. I think you're right. Okay. I guess now that answered your question more happily than you ever thought it could. All right, other questions? All right, quick rundown on the most important parts of arrays and array lists. So right now I'm just going to go through the mechanics of it really quickly. Both arrays and array lists are conceptually very simple. Whenever you want to collect a bunch of data of the same type that are somehow related, you put them in an array or an array list. And we'll see in a minute why you have these two choices. So let's do arrays first. They have a kind of distinctive syntax with these double brackets. When you make an array, you have to figure out how many elements you want, and you put that in back here. Here we have an array of tens. So you have the type, which in this case is double, then the brackets, the number of elements. The new tells you that you want to allocate 10 of them. What that gives you is a block of 10 doubles that are all initialized with 0, because doubles default to 0 with arrays. And I guess 0.0 if you want to be pedantic about it. And that's what happens when you say new double 10. Then you want to store this thing. It's kind of like an object. You can think of it as an object with 10 slots. You want to then store it in an object reference. And so that's done here. We call it values. And when you declare any variable, you have to give a type to the variable. And the type of an array is double followed by the brackets with no length in there. So values can be linked up to an array of length 10 or to an array of length 100 or even an array of length 0 if it so happens. It points to an array of values. Notice that you have to do both parts. You have to make the variable, that's the left-hand side here, and you have to make the actual array object, that's the constructor, the new call here, to the right. And sometimes people forget to do that. So that's the picture to have in mind. Now, what do you do with one of these things? And it really is kind of totally easy. All you want to ever do is you want to access the ith slot of one of these. And the syntax for that is you use the name of the array, values, and bracket I. That gives you the ith slot. So, so the syntax is a little bit special. You use this bracket I to get at the ith element. Whereas with strings, we would have used like char at of I, or even substring I plus 1 to get the ith element of a string. But just the symbols are different. The syntax is different. The logic is the same way. So if you want to move through all of the elements in an array, you can set I to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Each time you access values I. That way you can take something out of the array, put something in the array. So you can say values I equals I, or say I squared. We wanted to, that would put something. Or you could get it out by just reading from. So then you have to know how many elements are in there. Well, of course, you know there are 10 elements in there because you put in 10. Sometimes it happens to you that someone hands you an array and you don't know how many elements were in there. You can ask it by asking for what is values dot length. That's kind of similar to asking a string how long you are, except with a string it tells you how many characters are in the array. With a value, with an array, you get to know how many elements are in the array. The difference, though, is there is no parentheses here, and there's no good reason for it. It's stupid.
It just is how it is.
It just is how it is because someone was asleep at the wheel. They could have made a more consistent and cleaner syntax than this. For some reason, it didn't occur to them. It just happened, and we'll just have to live with it. You know, it's just like, you know, one time I bought a new car and had like all the buttons on the front matched nicely, except there was one button that was a different shape. And I never did figure out why. It had no different function or anything. I just think they just ran out of the other kind of buttons or something. So interestingly enough, that was when GM had co-built automobiles with Toyota on the same assembly line. And so that was the one change that GM made to that particular model.
Now they're making the
that one
electric
button.
cars there.
Yeah. So it does happen. Yeah, that button was a cheap piece of junk too, whereas all the other ones were like nice and solid.
Tesla gets to use those buttons now.
Okay, so they probably have a big box of them still somewhere. All right, so that's arrays. Now, as a practical matter, arrays have a big disadvantage, and that is that you have to make up your mind how long the array is supposed to be when you first create it. So let's say you make an application that should process whatever, a grade book for students. And how long should you make it? Well, how many students are you going to have? It's hard to predict, particularly the future. And so that makes arrays kind of unpopular. There's another construct called array lists that doesn't have that limitation. Arrays can grow and shrink on demand. As you admit more students into your class, the array list can grow. As students drop out, the array list shrinks automatically. And so just about any time that we want to have to model an actual application, something in the real world, one uses an array list. The only sad part about array list is that the syntax is completely different. It just is. So, if you want to make an array of something, you use the brackets. If you want to use an array list, then you use angle brackets and not brackets, and you have to actually use the keyword array list. So if I contrast that here with, if I wanted to make an array of strings, then I would say string, and then bracket, and then say 10 strings in here. And here with an array list, the new is the same. The array list is just different. Now it's angle bracket string instead of the string followed by the square brackets. And the array list, it doesn't have a length, because an array list starts out to be empty, and then it grows on demand as you add more things to it. And you just simply have to copy and paste both syntaxes depending on what you do. So to add something to an array list is very easy. You just use the add method, .add, and you add something. It gets larger. You want to ask it how big it is, you just ask it by saying names.size, and it tells you how big it is. So you just have to remember the size method. By the way, with all these CSV things, the size, that's why I call it size, because it's a data set and it tells you how many elements are in there. And size is kind of the method that the Java library uses for absolutely everything to find out how many elements are in there, except for strings where it uses length with the parentheses, and for arrays where it uses length without the parentheses. But we'll see, particularly next semester, you'll see size all the time. It's kind of the standard method. All right, so with array lists, you kind of have a similar behavior as with arrays. You put stuff in, you can find where they are, but the syntax for array lists, if you want to get at the ith element, you have to say get of I. Whereas with arrays, you would have said, what we had like values, bracket I. You know, what's better, the get or the bracket? The get has a great advantage. It looks like a method call, which it is, and you already know method calls. You've been doing method calls for months now. The bracket here is not a method call, and I guess its singular advantage is it saves you 3 letters of Python. But otherwise, it's kind of the same. If you want to set something, if you want to change a value in an array, you would have to say names.set I, comma, and then whatever the new value is. So in the next few days, as you do work with arrays and array lists, you simply have to say, what are the common operations that you do on them? You need to loop over them. You need to, which is an index I that goes from 0 to 1 less than their size or length. You need to get or set the ith element, and that's pretty much all you have to do. And the syntax, you have to construct them. And the syntax for them is just annoyingly different, and you'll just have to look it up in the book every time you want to do this until it becomes second nature. In terms of algorithms, we're going to go through some of the array algorithms, but the good news is that the string algorithms that we've been looking at, traversing a string, is so similar to traversing an array that a whole bunch of the algorithms are going to be exactly the same. And so you won't have to learn a whole new slew of algorithms. Now finally, since we give you the choice, when should you use arrays and when should you use array lists? And that choice is actually very simple. I'm just not allowed to publish it. And so here's the choice. Always use array lists. Array lists are easy. They are class, it's a class. They have objects. You use methods, get and set. You already know how to do that. They grow and shrink on demand. There's only one reason ever to use an array, and that is when the instructor tells you to use an array. But for whatever reason, every time I try to change this chapter around so that it says array lists and arrays, because every practicing programmer out there in the universe uses array lists all the time and arrays almost never. And every time, 10 out of 10 reviewers come back and say, but arrays are the more fundamental concept. I don't know what makes them the more fundamental concept, but apparently all other instructors in the world think they are. And so it will often happen to you that you've been given some assignment that says, do this work with arrays. And you just have to then do it with arrays because you want to pass the class. So for practical work, array lists are hard to beat. You know, they're flexible, they grow and shrink, what's not to like, and arrays are more primitive. But people who've been doing this stuff for 30 years have become so familiar with the syntax for arrays that they favor them. Yeah?
So for this the assignment string arrays, do we expect it to be arrays or array lists?
You can expect it, whatever the instructor gave you, and you might say, why did this knucklehead instructor give you arrays in this particular class? And the reason is that I'm designing an exam with 3 other instructors who dearly love arrays, or 2 of them. And so, you know, it's fair that you need to know both. So there are arrays out there. It's just when you do your own programs, you're naturally going to gravitate to array lists because they're easier to use. All right, that's all I want to say about arrays for right now. And so we'll go into the lab, and then we'll have another chunk of information in the afternoon.